name is Alicia Birr, and I'm head of consumer insights for Google in France. What that means is that my job is to work with Google biggest advertisers to help them better understand how consumer behaviors are evolving by analyzing what they search for on Google or what they watch on YouTube. And there are really two things you need to know about me. First, I'm really passionate about inclusive language, which is the topic of this video today. And second, I'm a big superhero movie fan. And so I would like to start with a quote. And that quote is, "With great power comes great responsibility." So now you might be like, whoa, wow, that's boring, because you probably have heard that quote thousands of times before, and I'm with you, that's true, it's a very well-known quote, probably a bit overused. But what if I told you that you had a superpower you did not know about? Maybe you would be like, wait a minute, and I might just have caught your attention. Well, I hope I have, because actually my intention today is to share with you my conviction. And my conviction is that you and I, we can create a more inclusive culture and fairer chances for everyone with a tool that's free, always available, and powerful, inclusive language. So your superpower are your words. So what you can expect in the next 20 minutes or so is first to understand what inclusive language is, but also to discover ways to unbias your language, and finally to learn about scientific evidence showing why it matters. But before I jump into the content, I want to provide a few disclaimers. First of all, I'm not here to teach you a lesson. I'm not here to tell you what to say or not to say. I'm just here to share my experience with you and to help you grow a critical mindset about the words that you use every day without even thinking about them or thinking about the impact that they have on others. Second, I'm not a linguist. I don't ask you to believe me or share my conviction. I ask you to trust the science behind it that I'm going to share. And finally, inclusive language comes in as many shapes and forms as there actually are languages. I speak 4 of them. It's already nice, but I don't speak all of them. I'm going to try and be as inclusive as possible, but I really encourage you at the end of this video to go online and search what inclusive language means for the languages that you speak. So the first question really is, have you ever heard about inclusive language? And my guess is that you probably have, but you just don't know about it. The reason why I say that is that it's because depending on the country where you live or the language that you speak, you might have heard about different expressions that actually talk about the same thing and talk about the same idea. For instance, in France, we talk a lot about écriture inclusive, which means inclusive writing. We focus a lot on the writing aspect of it. Whereas in other countries, we focus more on gender, like gender-neutral language in English or gendergerechte Sprache in German. But one thing is certain, no matter how you call it in your country or in your language, the interest for those topics online has really grown over the past 5 years. And one simple way for you to check it for yourself is to actually use a tool which is Google Trends, a tool that I love. If you go on Google Trends and you search for the topic inclusive language, you're going to see that in the world over the past 5 years, search interest has more than doubled. And the same trends can be seen when you look at gender-neutral language, where you really see that curves going up. It's interesting to know that it's not just about 1 or 2 countries in the world. It's really about every country. And the highest level of interest around gender-neutral language, for instance, comes from Spanish-speaking countries, followed by French and German-speaking countries. And because that topic is actually quite new, 5 years is not that such a long time, what people really are searching for now is just to understand what that is. So with searches such as definition, examples, which is what Gendersprache Beispiel means, or just trying to understand, generally speaking, what inclusive language is. So it's probably a good moment for me to share my definition of inclusive language. There are many that you can find online, but I think that this one works. So my definition is, inclusive language is paying particular attention to the way you speak and write in order to choose words and syntax that don't convey bias or stereotypes of any form. So let's take a few seconds just to highlight some bits and pieces of that definition. One important thing to note is that it's not just about your written communication, it's also about your oral communications, this thing you write and speak. It's not just about gender also, it's about all types of discrimination, and we are going to get back to that in a minute. So the reason why I use inclusive language is really because I think it's a good umbrella expression to gather all the other expressions that we've seen before, like precise language, inclusive language, gender-neutral language. To me, inclusive language is everything. But there is one thing you need to understand, is that inclusive language actually has two sides. One aspect of inclusive language is really around gender. How do you remove gender bias in your language? And the second aspect is around the vocabulary itself. How do you use words that don't convey or strengthen gender stereotypes? So now you're probably interested and hopefully you're hooked on the topic, but it might still seem very abstract. So let me give you some concrete examples of what that means in some languages for you to also understand where the problem lies, for instance, where the gender stereotypes come from, and also ways to unbias your language. First, let's see at the gender side of things. I would like you to think about one language that you speak and answer that question. Is that language non-gendered? It's the case for Turkish or Finnish or Chinese, and by the way, it's the case for most languages in the world. In those languages, there is no such category such as masculine or feminine in the language itself. It means that for understanding the gender of someone we're talking about, you need to have the full context, the full sentence. That is going to give you information about the gender, but the words themselves don't convey that information. Is your language naturally gendered? That's the case for English, where most of the times what helps you know the gender of a person is the use of pronouns, like he or she or her or his, for instance. Or is your language grammatically gendered? It's the case of most of the languages that I speak, like French or Spanish or German. In those languages, categories such as masculine and feminine are always present. There is no way not to use them. So for instance, if you take a word like user in English, which is neutral, it could mean anyone. Well, in French, I have two options. Either I say the masculine, utilisateur, or the feminine, utilisatrice. Same goes in German, Nutzer, Nutzerin, or in Spanish, usuario, usuaria. And the problem is I necessarily have to choose one or the other. And that's where the problem begins to emerge. Actually, in those languages where categories such as masculine and feminine exist, most of the time, the rule is to use the masculine by default. So let's say I want to speak about a group of 100 people, while I have 99 women and 1 man. I'm still in French going to use the masculine to talk about everyone. And that's where the gender stereotypes kicks in. So how to ungender your language then? Actually, you have two big options. The first option is to go gender neutral instead of using the masculine form. Let's take an example in English. Instead of saying the average American believes he watches too much TV, or even saying he or she watches too much TV, you could use a gender-neutral pronoun like they. The average American believes they watches too much TV, which is the most inclusive thing because it qualifies both men, women, but also non-binary people. But the same applies for the words themselves. Instead of saying chairman or policeman or fireman, you can say chairperson or police officer or firefighter. These are really inclusive words. A second way of doing things is actually to explicitly say the masculine and the feminine. And that's a very convenient way to ungender grammatically gendered languages, which is not ideal neither because then it's really binary. So it's not ideal, but it's better than just using the masculine form. So again, let's take an example. In French, the word étudiant means students. So if I talk about the students in general, I'm going to say les étudiants in the masculine form, even though I might speak about men and women. A more inclusive approach would be to use both forms, say les étudiants et les étudiantes in the masculine and the feminine, or to try and find a way to find an expression which gathers everyone, like people who study, which would be la population étudiante. And it's interesting for you to know that in grammatically gendered languages, we are starting to become creative with the language. And we see usage growing of ways to actually create combination of the masculine and the feminine version of a same word, at least in the written expression. So for instance, we use punctuation such as dots or dashes or even capital letters to create one word which combines the masculine and the feminine form. But that was for the gender aspect of thing. If we move to the vocabulary aspect of thing, and also to show you that again, inclusive language goes beyond gender, let me give you a few examples that you might use in your daily life. One word or two words actually that we don't use anymore at Google are blacklisted and whitelisted. Instead, we use words such as blocklisted or allowlisted, which are more precise because they say the same thing, but without conveying this idea that what is black is bad and should not be authorized, whereas what is white is good and can be authorized. So by using blocklisted and allowlisted, we are more precise and we don't convey racial bias. Another example is the word transsexual, which is not to be used anymore. Within the transgender community, actually, people have moved away from using that word because it's too highly focusing on sexuality or biology, when actually being trans is about your gender identity. So using the word transgender for now is the most appropriate way to describe those persons. And it's an interesting example also of how the way we see words is changing with time. And something that was okay to say 15 years ago is not okay to say anymore. And it also shows how you need to keep on educating yourself about the vocabulary, especially when it comes to gender identity. Another example is retarded or retardé in French, which you should not really use because it's a way of making fun of people with a mental illness. It's usually a word that you use to describe people that you don't find so bright. But again, it's by mocking people with disabilities. And so it's derogatory. And so I would recommend not using those words. And finally, a very simple and common examples. Who in this audience has never come into a meeting room and said, "Hey guys," even though there were girls and boys in the room? One way to be more inclusive is actually just to say, "Hey folks," without this masculine form that is supposed to represent everybody, when in fact it doesn't. And so now I hope you understood what is the idea behind the inclusive language and how you can unbias your language. But you kind of start feeling that it's not that easy because it requires you to change habits you've had since childhood and to really, again, grow a critical mindset about things that you say every day without even thinking about them. And so you might ask yourself, okay, but what's the point? These are just words. Well, actually, it's not the case. It's not true. It's not just words. It actually does have an impact on the world. And it's not me saying it, again, it's science. Actually, there is a field of science called psycholinguistics, and the goal of this field of science is to really study and measure the relationship between language and how we see the world, how we represent ourselves the world. And actually, there is a consensus in the last 40 years based on studies and numerous experiments that the masculine form in the language triggers masculine representations. So what this means is that even though you know and you've learned at school that the masculine is supposed to represent everyone, is supposed to be neutral, actually your brain doesn't really think that way because it's lazy and because it wants the fastest route to understanding what someone is saying to you. So if someone is talking to me in the masculine form, that might trigger the image of men in my head, again, even though I know that it's supposed to represent everyone. And that has direct impact on many different aspects of your life. For instance, it has impact on the studies that you're going to do or your kids are going to do. So that's why it's really important to use inclusive language to open career opportunities for everyone. So studies have shown that little girls and boys actually are more likely to consider a career, especially in male stereotypes jobs, when the job descriptions are written in an inclusive form. So basically we take two groups of kids and we show to the first group description of jobs that they could do in the future, but only in the masculine form, and to the other group description of jobs written inclusively in the masculine and feminine form. And what we see is that both girls and boys are more likely to consider themselves qualified to actually pursue studies to get a career and get that job. So it really means that it does have an impact. And so I would encourage you, with your kids or just kids around you, to pay attention to the way you speak about jobs, especially in grammatically gendered languages. Make sure to use both masculine and feminine so that it triggers a representation in their head, which is really inclusive. And the same applies in English, actually. Why not saying to a little boy, would you like to become a male nurse? Because nurse is highly stereotyped as a woman job. Second example, don't waste your opportunity to hire more women, especially in tech, where we need to have more diversity in the workforce. Why? Because we know that women tend to apply less often to job positions when the job description, again, is written entirely in the masculine form. And for instance, in France, we have the SNCF, the National Railway Company, which started using inclusive language in the job offers for train drivers because they really wanted to have more women applying to get more diversity in their workforce. And finally, raise awareness on microaggressions. If you have never heard about microaggressions before, here is a definition for you. Microaggressions is a term used to describe everyday, subtle, intentional, and oftentimes unintentional interactions or behaviors that communicate some sort of bias towards historically marginalized groups. And most of times, microaggressions are based on language. They are supposed to be jokes, like "don't go all mental on me," which is supposed to be funny or just neutral, but actually makes fun of people with mental illness. So the next time that you hear someone making a joke that you find offensive or that you're questioning yourself about, speak up and start a conversation. Because again, words actually do have an impact on how we see the world, but also how we feel included in a group. So where does that leave us and where does that leave you? So I would like you to leave with 3 big ideas. The first one is that inclusive language has the best ROI when it comes to DEI. Why am I talking about this? Again, inclusive language is accessible to everyone, and it's not more expensive to talk in an inclusive way than the opposite. And as we've seen, it does have impact. So when you think about return on investment, it's worth it. And I also like it because most of the times when you think about gender equality or equality in general, you kind of feel powerless. You don't know what you can do. Well, actually, one thing you can do that anyone can do is use inclusive language because in the long run, it's going to have an impact. Second, fear not. I know from experience that the main reason why people won't use inclusive language is because they're afraid. They're afraid of being judged, they're afraid of being seen as the activist in the company, or they're afraid of just making mistakes. And that's okay. Everybody is going to make mistakes. I still do mistakes every day. Give yourself room for error. Be kind to yourself and keep educating yourself because it's the right thing to do. And finally, start small, but grow a critical mindset about the things that you say every day. Watch your language. And maybe one thing that you can do after watching this video is go on YouTube or somewhere else and find more content about inclusive language. Again, maybe searching for content that applies to the languages that you speak. Or you might start a conversation and take a coffee with your colleagues or friends and talk about this video or talk about a latest joke that you heard that you thought was offensive, but you didn't really spoke up at the time. Now is the time to start the conversation. With that, thank you very much for watching. And if you want to keep the conversation, Google me and find me online. Thank you very much.